strategists and think tanks. Assembled to strike a balance. Partnerships to technical know-how. Security, ecology, culture, and more. Together, we strive to put India on the road to fulfilling its dreams of Viksit Bharat. The time has come for India to take its seat as the Vishwa Bandhu and give the world a safer, secure and stable identity. Chanakya Defence Dialogue 2024. Drivers in nation building. Fueling growth through comprehensive security.
Well, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we now come to our final session. But while I can do notice that while many of our members of the audience have stepped out to give a quick stretch to themselves, that being said, we are someone who wish to always follow time, which is why we will get the session started. And let's do that by, first up, also setting a quick context about what this session is about. Now, as you see, the previous session turned out to be a segue to this session. While we talk about facing the dual challenges of sophisticated technological advancements and complex security threats, this panel will actually come together to explore strategies to balance technological innovation with robust defense measure in line with the Atmanirbhar Bharat's vision. That being said, we've got some amazing set of speakers lined up. So first up, I'd like to please invite our session chair and moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us Vice Admiral Ajendra Bahadur Singh, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, a former flag officer of the Indian Navy, and he has last served as a flag officer commanding-in-chief, Western Naval Command, from 2021. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. In fact, he's also been an instructor at the National Defence Academy in Pune, and Navigation and Direction School at Kochi, and also directing staff at Defence Services Staff College in Wellington. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very distinguished speaker here. Can we have a distinguished round of applause? Because that will also give me a permission to get up and invite my next set of speakers. Well, on that note, let me move ahead and also invite our next speaker. We have with us Dr. Konstantin Bogdanov, Head of the Section for Strategic Analysis and Forecasting at the Center for International Security, Primakov National Research Institute of World Economy and International Relations in Russia. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. In fact, his professional interests include military and strategic studies, nuclear strategy, strategic stability, arms control, and emerging dual-use technologies. Moving ahead, we'd now like to invite our next speaker. We have with us Professor Amit Gupta, Senior Advisor to the Forum of Federations, Ottawa, Canada. He's also served as a faculty of the Department of International Security at the U.S. Air Force Air War College, Maxwell, AFB. And he's also authored several books and edited various publications. A round of applause to please help me welcome Professor Amit Gupta. And our final speaker for the finale session, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us Dr. Patrick Bratton, Professor of National Security and Strategy Studies and the Director of the South Asian Regional Studies Program at the U.S. Army War College. His research focuses on strategic studies, Indian foreign and security policy, and maritime issues. Let's also flow into a round of applause one more time. Please help me welcome Dr. Patrick and all our speakers. I promised our audience it's a groundbreaking session because this is all about the groundbreakers. With that, I'd like to quickly hand over the proceedings to you, sir. Over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed an honor to be chairing this, I call this the parking lot session, because more people will be found in the parking lots than here. But nonetheless, I think over the last day, yesterday and today, we've had some very interesting deliberations, and we have been exposed to the rapidly evolving landscape of global conflicts and its interplay with technologies, national interests, and the whole gamut of military issues. Our aim in this session would be to build and move ahead on those words of wisdom that we have assimilated over the last 5 sessions. I would like to thank DG Claus for having chosen a naval veteran to run this session for him on modernization of our armed forces and keeping the interest of the armed forces and the Indian Army in particular at the forefront. This being the last session, we'll focus on Indian Army's capability through improved surveillance, precision strikes, multi-domain operations, while also addressing new vulnerabilities and ethical challenges that they will present. To help us in this journey, we've got a very outstanding discussants. Dr. Konstantin Bogdanov, he comes from Russia, and his professional interests lie in fields of emerging dual-use technologies, and he will talk to us on charting the course for future land warfare. Dr. Amit Gupta, you've heard his biodata. His research focuses on international security, demography, popular culture, and politics. He is a regular speaker in India and abroad, and his topic is balancing technology choices in terms of acquisition, adaptation, and integration. And Dr. Patrick Bratton, who comes to us from the US Army War College, his core research focuses on Indian foreign policy, security studies, and maritime issues. He is no stranger to India, having been a visiting fellow at the IDSA and currently with the National Maritime Foundation. He will debate on the topic of being future ready, preparing for tomorrow's warriors in multi-domain warfare. Each one of them have excelled and have many unique and distinct and insightful publications to their credit. I'm sure you'll benefit from their knowledge. So to begin this session, let me flag some major issues to build on the framework. As far as we are concerned, global competition continues unabated, leading to violent conflicts in various parts of the world. The special military operations by Russia and Ukraine have been running for almost 32 months as on date, and has led to the devastation of the entire engineering and weapon production facilities in Ukraine. And yet, the conflict is not coming to an end due to the funding and support of many nations, directly or indirectly. Recent news reports that Germany is going to withdraw its commitment to supply weapons to Ukraine, and depending on the results of the upcoming US elections, we could see a change in policy and its stance. The next couple of weeks are therefore very important for all of us. The attack by Hamas in built-up areas in Israel and killing over 1,200 people on 7th of October last year was a watershed event. This brings out that there is no scope for laxity in military preparedness. Further, placing trust in the belief that the Palestinians have decoupled from the Hamas and the Hezbollahs appears to be foolhardy in hindsight. The lesson here is that in last 1 year, the escalation of violence has spread the conflict to a larger area of West Asia, and the level of violence has actually far exceeded all expectations that we had. The tacit support of many nation states, such as Iran, Yemen, and other regional players, has also escalated the violence in maritime areas around the Red Sea, thereby impacting even the non-belligerents and the nation states in the vicinity. As has been in large number of exercise scenarios, threats to use nuclear weapons have been heard in the recent past. But the saving grace is that no such overt threat has manifested in its use. In both the conflicts, the United Nations and the larger international communities have been either bystanders or participants and have largely been unsuccessful in they endeavor to limit the extent of the conflict. On the Indo subcontinent, as far as the Indian Army is concerned, this audience is well aware, so I'm not going to brief on that. We are actively engaged with the PLA on the LAC ever since the Galwan crisis in June 2020. That's more than 4 years as on date. On the western borders with Pakistan, the influx of terrorists had reduced in the past, but saw a dramatic rise in the last few months during the build-up of the state elections. We are hopeful that the ops situation will improve during the winter season this year. Therefore, if we look at the Indian Army, it is fully committed and deployed in the full spectrum, from face-to-face standoff to CICT operations. Our neighborhood is also very tense, where democratically elected governments have been overthrown in Bangladesh and Myanmar, and Sri Lanka goes to poll next month, 14th of November. Global competition and contestation in some other areas is also simmering, and this could result in violence and military activity on the horizon. The most significant of them, that being in Indo-Pacific, where the threat to Taiwan is real and can manifest in a short time frame. I had to bring this out as a naval officer. Economies of the world are not doing too well, but the world of technology is fast driving the nature of and conduct of warfare. Unmanned sensors and associated weapons, long-range missiles and rockets, air defense, and near-instant satellite-based communications and data analytics-based decision-making process, resulting in battle space becoming more transparent and the weapon delivery becoming more lethal. To manage such a complex scenario of national security, our Army requires agility of mind, out-of-the-box thinking, and well-trained politico-military leadership. With that as a preamble, I would like to hear the views of our panelists. First and foremost, Dr. Konstantin, who's going to talk to us about the future of land warfare, contours, charting the contours. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you, Admiral. First of all, I want to express my gratitude for organizers, and it's a great honor to deliver some of my humble thoughts in front of such distinguished, seasoned audience with a lot of professional experience in the area. So I hope that some of my thoughts can be more or less helpful in this area. I would deliver some conclusions, I would say intermediate conclusions from the experience of recent conflicts. First of all, from Ukrainian armed conflict, also from Nagorno-Karabakh war of 2020, and partially from Libyan experience of Libyan civil war. It was just little part of it. We have a healthy and rich agenda for a session, so I will be extremely brief, and I want to outline just some, from my perspective, key points of recent conflicts. It's not just a, complete model of the land warfare, especially future land warfare. First of all, it's some observation that we need to consider, to analyze, and to make some conclusions about possible ways how we could conduct any combat operation during land warfare. Speaking about, first of all, Ukrainian conflict as the most rich source of combat experience just now. During the large-scale hostilities in the center of Europe, we could catch two key points, I would say, peculiarities of this conflict. It could be surprising, but actually it's not. First item, it's low numbers of manpower. To some extent, it's a demographical problem, which Dmitry Stefanovich referred during last session. If you have low reserve manpower, if you have relatively small armies, relatively I mean in comparison with the armies of classical mobilization period in the end of 19th century and the first part of the 20th century, and even during Cold War. Let's compare the Soviet army during the 1980s, all those deployed forces, all those reserve components, and just compare it with the armed forces of Russian Federation in terms of numbers, okay? Both equipment, vehicles, weapons, and manpower. And the same thing we could do with any more or less developed army in the West, except maybe Turkey, because Turkey still in the conflict with Greece, frozen conflict, and the Turkish army haven't been don't have this impact to lower the numbers and give up some capabilities. Anyway, during the combat operation in Ukraine, one could see the low numbers, low densities during the line of contact, and it leads us to the second item, so-called transparency of battlefield. Actually, it's a buzzword just now, but on Ukraine, during the Ukrainian conflict, it's just the reality of the day. A lot of tactical transparency on the level of platoons, squads, and companies. A lot of operational strategic transparency on the level of theater. One could imagine the situation when the fog of war are starting to move somewhat on the edge of the scene, and here we are, we have a transparent, as I used to call it, fishbowl, with all those people, with all those vehicles, and in the combat management systems, which could operate virtually in the real time. So combining those two items, low numbers, lack of manpower, and transparency of battlefields in terms of tracking, reconnaissance, targeting, you actually receive a problem of positional stalemate. Classical positional stalemate. Not just, like during World War I, when you have 1 million armies on entrenched, multi-layered fortifications with all those artillery barrages. Because positional warfare actually is not about numbers. It's not about trenches. It's first of all about logistics, about force correlation, about communication, and about balance of all those things between two adversaries. If you have low numbers, dispersed battle order, you still can have positional stalemate. And Ukrainian conflict is the best example of such entity. So how we could elaborate it to the experience of different countries and different nations? First of all, I would say that such conclusions could be very useful for the global South armies, because lack of trained manpower, classical problem of the global South, and very cheap and accessible capabilities in terms of tracking and reconnaissance, because a lot of drones which are actually in use in Ukraine, it's more or less commercially off-the-shelf drones. Some of them are in serial production on military facilities. Some of them just, at least in 2022, have been procured, I would say, from commercial suppliers from China and all those do-it-yourself system. Actually, it's very aligned to global South, because they could obtain anything and make the useful thing, not to be involved into the race of the advanced, expensive technologies and capabilities. So combined lack of trained manpower and cheap reconnaissance, we could conclude that the problem of the positional stalemate and low numbers could be the problem for armies of Global South. That's the question, actually, whether such a conclusion might be applied for, high-level first-tier conflicts. First of all, to potential conflict between Russia and NATO, and to potential conflict between China and the United States. From my perspective, it is not. But the problem is the stability-instability paradox led the major nuclear powers, to decision not to escalate conflicts higher than some considerably low levels. So actually, the main tool of major powers during the current geopolitical clash would be proxy wars and some low-level conflicts. So our conclusions are still relevant, even for the armies of the first-tier major powers. And at the end of my presentation, I would like to raise the question how all those might be relevant for an Indian army. From my perspective, numbers is not a problem. Numbers is not a problem, but still the problem is number of trained personnel, because literally in every army you can get a lot of sophisticated guys that knew a lot about innovative tactics and all those do-it-yourself, self-tuned capabilities. But the real problem, from my perspective, in any large army is the maintaining of medium average level of the training of personnel in terms of doctrine and in terms of tactical approaches and use of equipment. But from my perspective, the second problem with reconnaissance, with transparent battlefield, is relevant for Indian Army as well. So I think if Indian Army want to consider the image of the future land battlefield, the problem of transparent battlefield should be solved somehow. Probably I'll stop there.
Thank you. I request Dr. Amit Gupta. He's going to speak to us on balancing technology choices in terms of acquisition, adaptation, and integration.
Okay, could you put thank you. Before I get to the slides, I just want to talk about that last panel, because it put the cart, sorry? Okay. The problem with the last panel was it put the cart before the horse. That we're going to have technology, and technology is always the solution. Here's what you need to understand. This is what the Americans started from the first Gulf War. And what was that? High tech will resolve everything. 2, we'll have low casualties. And if you look at the Afghan conflict and the Iraq conflict, over a 20-year period, the United States lost 8,492 soldiers. It lost 58,000 in Vietnam, it lost 53,000 in Korea, it lost over 400,000 in World War II. Okay? Western militaries become casualty averse. Third thing you've got to remember is the US comes up with the idea of embedding journalists. So you get one side of the war, and as my friend David Prohaska, who used to teach with me at the University of Illinois, pointed out, you have disappearing Iraqis. Because we never saw the other side of the story, which was one of the reasons Al Jazeera became so unpopular in the Iraq war, because they were giving you the other side of the story. Now, what has changed with Ukraine, Russia, and the Israelis and non-state actors, and the Israelis and a state actor called Iran? It's brought back the lethality, brutality, horror of war. Father Zelensky claims that 31,000 Ukrainians have died. That's a lie. The number may be closer to, what is it, 200,000, Constantine, or higher? What is your estimate? I'll let you ponder that one. The one I've heard is, sorry, sir?
It's around that much.
It's around that much. It's around 200,000. And on the Russian side, it's a fairly high number itself. I've seen everything from 50,000 to what the world-famous State Department claims is over 500,000. And I should tell you how biased all this is. In February of 2022, MI6, which is best known for having a fictional employee called James Bond, was claiming 50,000 Russians had died. In July, they're claiming 50,000 Russians have died. And I have a friend in Belgium called Tanguy Sade, who says, Amit, if it's a full-tempo war, how is it that the needle has not changed on the number of casualties? So keep this in mind. Low casualties, high technology, embedded journalism, and one more thing, third-rate opponents. Do not make the Iraqis out to be anything good. When ISIS attacked Mosul, it wasn't to take Mosul, it was to do a jailbreak. The Iraqis took off their uniforms and ran. Okay? That's not a serious military. That was basically an internal benefits organization, and it was basically a thug organization. Let's beat up on unarmed civilians, so on. Okay? So if you keep that in mind, what have Ukraine and Russia and the Israelis and their state and non-state opponents brought back? War is about brutality. War is about people dying. War is about people saying, I will stand up and fight for my country. And if you talk to Russians and Ukrainians, they say the same thing. You ask the Russians, why are the Ukrainians such good fighters? They say, of course, they're Russians. You know? And you ask the Ukrainians the same question, they say, yeah, well, you know, we really wouldn't mind being part of Russia if they'd called it Ukraine. Okay, so this has brought it back. When some country says we're willing to take 200,000 dead to fight a war, that's a very hard country to take over. And when Russia says we'll take 200,000 dead to fight a war, it means they're serious. And put aside the stupidity of NATO, oh, the Soviet meat grinder. That's how wars were fought. And, you know, I hate to make a case for literacy because it seems to have gone into the TikTok generation. But look at it this way, guys. Go to USI Library and pick out Basil Littlehart's Histories of World War II and see how World War II was fought. And I'll just tell you one thing about the Russians, then I'll talk about this. Because sometimes you have to put panels on perspective, okay? In World War II, Father Stalin had a mental breakdown or nervous breakdown, and he purged the entire army upper leadership. So it was left to the peasants to fight the Wehrmacht. And what the peasants did was actually incredibly brave. They took high casualties. They would stop a Russian panzer tank, pull out the tank crew, kill him, then disembowel them and put them on top of the tank. And they were sending a message to the next panzer unit that went through, which was, boys, this is how we fight a war. And if you ever talk to the Germans, they're not scared of the rest of Europe, because seriously, you think the Dutch can fight. But who they are scared of is the Russians. So keep this in mind, okay? The nature of war has changed. It's not AI, it's not tactical innovations. The Russians just took Volodar, which is the Ukrainian fortress, which they've been trying to take for a while, by using guys on motorcycles to come and take the trenches. I don't think you can call that a revolution in military affairs. That's innovation in military affairs, but that's also great courage. So if you keep this in mind, you understand these wars. And it's the same thing Israel-Gaza, Israel-Iran, both sides are fighting. And war is about brutality, war is about devastation, war is about decades of loss. Now I'll get to talking about this. Okay, is this moving? Yeah. Look, up top you've got all the countries which spend heavily on defense. I'll come to the Americans in a minute, but let's go down the rest of them. The Chinese have their own financial problems. Modernization is becoming difficult. Ukraine is being subsidized by the West. They've been given close to $300 billion. They won't pay back a penny. Israel, if you look at that first attack on April, the Americans, the British, others were part of the air umbrella. And the numbers on this, and we'll find this out only 2 years from now. We won't find it out now. I mean, there's one Israeli brigadier like you who claims you guys spent $1 billion. Theodore Postel at MIT says the Allies, the Americans and so on, spent close to $2 to $3 billion. And they used AIM-9 sidewinders, which are $500,000 apiece, to shoot down $20,000 drones from Iran. And in that way, I do agree with the last panel. Yes, you can't sustain that. Okay? Now, take the rest of them. Russia's fighting a war. I don't think they're going to keep the militarization effort up after there's a peace, which leaves the Australians and the North Koreans. The Australians have a lot of money, and I'll show you why in a second. And the North Koreans are happy people. They kill their own citizens, and they build nuclear bombs. If you have that kind of amoral attitude to life, it's not difficult to militarize. But for the rest of the world, what is really important is it's a clash between guns and butter. Guns being militarization, butter being the investment in social, developmental programs. And for the rest of the world, the argument is always, if it's a clash between guns and butter, butter wins. And I'll just talk about India. Look, last 5 governments in India, 2 Manmohan Singh and 3 Narendra Bhai Modi, have kept defense expenditure around 2%. And it's not going to go above that. And yeah, I keep hearing this thing in India that, well, our GDP will grow and therefore 2%, if it was 10,000 crores, will be 15,000 crores. The government may not prioritize that money to you. They may well say, okay, we used to give you 2,000, but now that everything's gone up, you're going to get 1.7. And add one more thing to this. The Americans cheat on this. And I've kept trying to write on this, and I always get a stone wall on it. The American defense budget is $850 billion. They're spending $50 billion on nuclear modernization because Trump put $500 billion into modernizing nuclear weapons. And this is what's called the Veterans Administration budget, which nobody talks about. But if you look at the numbers there, on the left-hand column is the total amount. The right-hand column is how much is spent on medical care. And as you can see, that's almost doubled in the last 6 years, and it's going up at a budget rate of about 8 to 12%. Now, I used to run a budget. I would have to go and beg for a 1%, 2% increase to my program. Who gets a 10 to 12% increase? And can a country sustain that? And look at how much is the medical cost in this. And when I joined the U.S. Air Force in 2001, the Veterans Administration defense budget was $48 billion. This is what 2 wars do to you. And Joe Stiglitz, the economist, said, oh, it's going to be a $3 trillion bill. Pentagon accused him of being a traitor. He said, I'll go back and do my math. He said, no, my math is right. And he's being proven correctly. So, where does this go? And in the world of guns versus butter, look at the Europeans. Because, after Russia happened, or after Ukraine happened, the Europeans went, Europe is back, we're going to militarize. And that German genius, Olaf Scholz, and his Sancho Panza, Ursula von der Leyen, have been the biggest ones talking about militarization. But look at those numbers. And I'll just go down 2 of those, and then we'll come to the Indian dilemma. The British went from 180,000 soldiers to 80,000 soldiers. So let me talk to the land warriors in here, since you're talking groundbreaking. It's not groundbreaking. Groundbreaking is construction. I'm talking devastation here. If you have 80,000 soldiers, how many divisions can you put in the field? If you're lucky, 1. And that would be a 12,000-man division, not big division like yours. And look at the Germans, who used to be 327,000 or 61,000. What can they put out? A brigade? What do you guys think? I'll let you think that one over. Take photos of this, because not many people want to discuss this in Washington, D.C. right now. And look at what happens. The reason I've got Netherlands up is I'm giving this talk in Groningen in North Holland in 10 days. And I wanted to put the Dutch numbers up. And the Dutch won't fight. Young Germans say we will not be conscripted. So where are they going to get the manpower? And they all want to spend their money on healthcare. And by the way, Britain, which still thinks it has an empire, sent a aircraft carrier called the Queen Elizabeth into the Indo-Pacific. But 2/3 of the airplanes on it were from the Royal Air Force. So I have a friend who's a retired U.S. Army, Navy admiral. I said, would you take a USAF F-35 on your Gerald Ford aircraft carrier? He said, I'd rather jump off the bridge. Because that's what self-respecting Navy people think. The British Air will take anything that can come there. This is the reality on guns versus butter. And India is not quite here. We're not the Swedes, but we feel the same pressures. Now, look, what are India's constraints? And again, they need to be talked about systematically. One, India has no strategic partners. Nobody is going to give you $300 billion to fight a war. They won't even give you 1%, which is $3 billion. When Galwan happened, does anybody here know what Donald Trump said? Donald Trump said, I will mediate. He didn't say the perfidious Chinese attacked the poor Indians. Because that means he's on your side. Correct me if I'm wrong. Mediation means I'm willing to adopt a neutral position. Okay? Second, stop this talk about critical technologies. And this is where I disagreed with Satish Reddy and Sanjeev Sanyal yesterday, because while they did raise the points of know-how and know-why, they didn't get it right. You're going to buy the F414, which is a 1980s engine, so congratulations, you're buying the Maruti 800 technology. I wish you well. But what you need to understand in this is you're only getting 80% of the engine. The most critical percent is those turbine blades which rotate at high speed and they create the propulsion. That technology will not be given to you. What that means in real terms is you'll be able to assemble an engine, you won't be able to make the next generation engine, and if for some reasons the blades don't come, GE yet again has supply chain problems, your engines are going to be sitting around in hell. Okay? So this part you have to remember. Same thing with the electromagnetic catapult. I should throw one to the Navy. They've been talking about that for 8 years. The US Navy says it's too new for us to give to anybody. Okay? Other thing you've got to remember is, because most countries' reserves are so incredibly low, they can charge you an arm and a leg for weaponry if you get into trouble. After Doklam, the IAF went to the Israelis and said, can we get munitions? The Israelis said, not a problem. We'll dip into our war reserves, but it'll cost you 150%. Well, after Galwan, they went to the French and said, can we get munitions? French said, not a problem. We have to dip into our war reserves. What number did they come up with? 150%. That's the going rate in international affairs, by the way. So nobody's trying to exploit anybody else. So keep that part in mind. You have to be able to make some of this stuff at home. And I'll come to that in a second. There's one good thing on your side. Indian military doctrine is defensive. There's no serious politician in India who says, I want to take back Aksai Chin with the use of military force. And if you find one, please introduce me to him. We'll have a very interesting, amusing conversation. Similarly on Galwan, when Galwan happened, I gave a talk at St. George, which I think is still around in Delhi. And I said, you guys need to talk to the Chinese and find a diplomatic solution. People there told me, you're a Chinese agent, why should we talk to the Chinese? Well, I turned out to be a genius as of this Monday, because that's exactly what happened. And I can tell you why later, if you like. You know, India doesn't go for offensive military operations unless it's extreme circumstances. It is not this country's military doctrine. And because it's not this country's military doctrine, a lot of the high-tech stuff doesn't apply to this country. And I'll get to this now. Okay? Look, the last part in this, is you have to understand China. And you can't understand China by making statements. You have to look at the data. These are China's major trading partners. ASEAN is 911 billion, the EU is 794 billion, US is 680 billion. I'm getting tired of reading it out, so you guys, thank you. Take out your cell phones and take photos. Yes. Now, why is this important? IDSA went out years ago and said, debt trap and humnum tota, which, by the way, is shoddy academic work, because Deborah Brottigam at Johns Hopkins has written a very extensive article in the Atlantic Monthly on it, says no debt trap. And it was the Canadians who suggested humnum tota, it wasn't the Chinese. The story is a bit different from what is projected there. Nobody is looking at debt trap. Everybody is looking at the fact that China is the global economic behemoth, and the numbers don't lie. And you keep talking about China as our major trading partner. It's also the major trading partner of everybody else on the planet. So how do you integrate working with and I'll add one more thing to this, by the way. If you've read the latest economic survey of India, which I think is written by Nirmala Sitharaman and MA History Saktikanto Das, it essentially says we want Chinese foreign direct investment in India. This would not have come out of either the Ministry of Finance or the Reserve Bank of India. They lack the imagination or the authority. This came straight from the Prime Minister's office, and it's because Indian business houses want the link. This is very clear. Okay? So this is where you're headed as a nation. It doesn't take away from the fact that there's a border dispute. Doesn't take away from the fact that you have to maintain a presence on the border. Doesn't take away from the fact that you have to militarize your forces. Okay? Right. What is the best way to do this? And I'm only going to talk domestic production, which is what General Dushant wanted me to talk about. And look, there's three things you can do. You buy them domestically. You buy them abroad, you produce them domestically, or you collaborate. And the thing you've got to remember, which everybody forgets in this Atmanirbhar debate in this country, India achieved Atmanirbhar in the most important part of weapons production. It has Atmanirbhar in strategic weaponry. And that's due to very brilliant Indian scientists like Raja Ramanna and Anil Kakotkar, who did that for you. And nobody can take it away from you. And that gives you, at the end of the day, a security which Ukraine doesn't have. Remember, Ukraine gave away its weapons in 1993-94. They're probably sitting and cursing that now. Okay? What is at the lower level, and I'll come to that, okay? At the lower level, sorry, let me go back one. At the lower level, there was a British scientist called P.M.S. Blackett. He's the guy that Oppenheimer gives the poisoned apple to in the movie. He was his PhD advisor. And by the way, since then, when my students offer me food, I say, no, thank you. I do not trust these people. But the point is, Nehru called P.M.S. Blackett to India in 1948 and said, what weaponry should we build? Because Atmanirbhar is not a new idea. It's old wine in a new bottle. Blackett said, don't make advanced conventional weapons because they become obsolescent easily. But more importantly, what you need to understand is these weapons are very difficult to manufacture. One young man asked the question of the HF-24 Marut. Ask me about it, and I'll give you the full story. But that was our attempt in India to make an advanced conventional weapon. It failed because the Indian government engaged in a Banya defense policy, and instead of giving them the money to buy a real engine, kept doing piecemeal things which didn't work. Okay? Now, what has happened is essentially that part of defense production has been taken over by the private sector. So Tatas with their Crystal armored fighting vehicles, Mahindras, Bharat Forge, MKU, Larsen and Toubro, they are all making a range of artillery and other stuff, rifles, touchy subject. And they're doing all this, and it's good enough quality. And by the way, they're not doing it because they've suddenly built a science base. They're buying the factories from abroad. Like when we were kids, the Bata factory was bought from Czechoslovakia and brought to India. It's the same logic. Okay? But that part of arms production is being done. It's advanced arms production, aircraft, tanks, air defense systems, so on, where the problems are. And what's the story there? we should have done what Chairman Mao said. Chairman Mao in 1959, the Russian advisors left. And Chairman Mao called in his aircraft designers and said, guys, I'm a peasant, so don't give me this line that you want to make the F-35. Tell me what you can actually make. And they said, we can make the MiG-17. So they made 1,800 of them. Then they said, we can make the MiG-19. They made 4,500 of them. Then they made the MiG-21, and you guys can all see the list there. HAL has never made 1,700 aircraft of anything after all these years of production. And hats off to the new chief who says, yeah, I'm all for Atmanirbhar, but who's going to give me an aeroplane? That's a fair question to ask. So my question to you is idealistic versus realistic. Thanks to the private sector, the realistic at the lower level is happening. Now, I've told you about the problems with conventional. The best way to do conventional now is collaborations. And it's been a mixed bag. BrahMos has been a success. There will be a BrahMos 2. Sukhoi 57, for a variety of reasons, the Air Force pulled out. And look, licensed production has its own pitfalls. There's a lobby in this city which wants to buy the F-16. Two problems with it, giving them to you for free. One, the Americans will not allow you to put a strategic weapon, nuclear bomb, under the F-16, because that goes against American non-proliferation policies. You can do that on the Mirage 2000, you can do that on the Rafale. Second thing is, and you talk to Lockheed about this, call them in. Lockheed will tell you, you can make spare parts in India, but you can't tell us where they go. Which means...
Dr. Amit, can we just do that because we're running out of time?
Yeah, okay.
You're far exceeded.
I'll take 1 minute here. In other words, you can make a spare part for an F-16 in India, it can end up on a Pakistani F-16. Let me give you my conclusions, okay? What you need is lethality and affordability. And lethality now is drones, artillery, rockets, insufficient numbers, missiles. To me, if you want to do missiles, talk to the Russians. The Iskander, the Kinzhal, that collaboration will happen. It won't happen with the Americans or the West. If you want to do drones, don't go to HAL because Rustam became tapas, it still doesn't work. I would talk to the Brazilians and the South Africans who are parts of BRICS and make a BISA drone and sell it across the services, the Coast Guard and the BSF. Okay? And the good thing is Brazil has a mature aerospace industry, South Africa has a mature defense industry, and they both like India, which is a very important thing, and have lots and lots of reserves of ammunition. Because the one thing Ukraine and Russia taught us was you can't have enough of artillery shells. I can go on. Okay, one last thing here. Next war, and the first panel got to this, but the next war, remember, will be one on TikTok. Because nobody reads the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all that. And this was the problem for the Israelis. The Israelis, the Washington Post, the New York Times, etc., understood their strategic problems. On TikTok, all you saw was war and people's legs and arms being blowing off. What do you do after that? I'm done, thank you. And you can take the time you're supposed to give me for a discussion. No, that's fine. Guys, I think we got the point.
Can I request next speaker, Patrick, to go ahead?
All right. Thank you. Hello, namaskar, and thank you all for having me. Dhanyavad to Claus and to the Indian Army leadership. I'm going to start with two disclaimers. One, my jet lag is kicking in, so if I'm a little bit spacey, please forgive me. And my second disclaimer is the sort of standard, these are my own views, not the views of the Army War College, the U.S. Department of Defense, the U.S. government. So I've been asked to share my thoughts on being future ready, being prepared for tomorrow's warriors. In order to do that, I thought probably the most useful thing I could do, given what I do, is talking about some of my own experiences, observations in American professional military education, and combine that with my observations of being in India about 15 or so years now, doing work on and off and again. And I think it's fitting in this case that I kind of underline the importance of developing within your militaries, within the Indian Army, sort of a lifelong pursuit of knowledge and learning. And this is very fitting, I think, at a Chanakya defense dialogue, because Chanakya himself wrote a lot about the importance of learning. He said that you can't go a single day without learning. He also has a very funny, little bit off-color comment about the value of unlearned people that I sometimes give to my more truculent students who don't like to read, but I won't say it here, so I'll just move on from that. So a couple of things I want to kind of highlight here is just the importance of looking ahead and looking at the future in technology. And we have had a lot of good panels yesterday and today about this, so I won't go too far into it, but I would give a couple of cautions, I think, in how we conventionally think about future and warfare and things like that. Oftentimes we fall into a trap of looking at sort of silver bullets and wonder weapons. And we kind of take a look at a capacity, particularly something that is useful on the battlefield, and sort of isolate that out as the end-all be-all of what makes change in warfare, right? So if you take a look at conventionally ways we think about the history of warfare, people look at like tanks or gunpowder or something like this. Oftentimes, as alluded to in the previous the previous conversation that we had, it's actually all the stuff behind that that's far more important. So if you look at like the gunpowder revolution, it's not just the development of firearms, but it's the development basically of the early modern state. And a state apparatus that can tax, can extract resources from its population, can have a standing army, can have the army that will develop and integrate the print revolution, the scientific revolution, into engineering, into military academies, into siege warfare. That's far more important than whether or not you have guns, for example. So if we look at changes like AI, for example, I would say, and I'm not a specialist on AI, I think we're looking at the potential for revolutionary change in the next couple of decades. And we can't kind of think about it just like, well, we're going to have the army we've always had and we'll just add AI, right? There's probably going to be some massive shifts within military organizations, within societies, within political systems, the same way we've seen in some of these larger quote-unquote military revolutions in the past. So a couple of things that I think are useful for that have been said in some of the other panels is I think it's very important, right, that military officers get exposure to AI, how it works, thinking about, I echoed Dimitri's comments earlier in the previous panel, right? They have to understand how those machines are making decisions, be comfortable with them, and kind of see AI as a team, as a member of the team that they're operating with, not just something that you've added in like a radar or something like this. It's also really important, I think, in the defense community that we have as much contact as we can with the private sector and seeing what's going on there, because a lot of the technological evolutions and developments will not happen purely within the military sector. So we have to have a curiosity and interaction with that. And I think that's very, very valuable to do. It's not always easy, right? Military officers have a lot of commitments and demands on their time, rightly so, but it's something that's quite important. I'd also like to kind of continue my history bit for a bit, because that's sort of what I do at the War College. I think it's really important to have a more analytical and critical view of history. I think oftentimes in military organizations and countries, when we look at our own military history and the military history of others, we tend to sort of gravitate to very comfortable, sort of feel-good narratives about success and things that work, and we tend to be very self-congratulatory about our military history. I think it's very important to have honest, open history that's accessible, and that'll help you to make lessons learned, case studies, experiential learning, simulations, and things like that. I will say, having spent a fair amount of time in Indian archives and working at Indian professional military organizations and think tanks, I have to say it could be more open, if you will, the archives in India than they are, and I think that inhibits a lot of the work of researchers to come up with more accurate history. I can go more into detail on that kind of stuff, but I think it's important. Linked to history, I think, and we've heard some comments about that in other panels today, is the importance, I think, for strategic leaders to have strategic empathy, to learn about the history, culture, and values of others. Now, this seems to be most apparent when we think about competitors, right? It's very useful to know what your competitors are thinking, what they value, and that helps you to devise your strategies for them. While this seems like a kind of, as we would say in the U.S., a kind of Captain Obvious sort of point, you can look at a whole rifle examples of history where people enacted strategies against an opponent without really thinking about what the opponent was doing, the political realities in that opponent's capital, what the opponent valued, what they didn't. And I think it's really important to think about it. As Clausewitz reminds us, right, war is not just exerting force on a lifeless mass, but it's a dialectic, right? The enemy is a dynamic actor that makes decisions as well, your competitor will. I think it's also really important to understand and have strategic empathy for your partners, right? So we always kind of think about adversaries, but partners are important. Partners have different perspectives. So for example, from an American perspective, the great sort of partnerships that we've been developing with India in the past 20 years are really important, but we have a much longer relationship with that that's not always so harmonious. It's useful to have a better understanding of that, what are the friction points in the past, and so that way we can interact better with each other in the future. So I think that's really important. Another thing as well, I think, is that oftentimes when we look at history, we have a tendency to sort of, as Jonathan Dull said, to be sort of deafened by the sounds of cannons. So we tend to be fascinated with battles and operations and not too interested in sort of the interaction between strategy and operations, particularly when conflicts end. So we have a lot of books written about how conflicts began, how conflicts are prosecuted. We have much less good analysis on how conflicts end and the interplay between operations and strategy at the close of the war. And I think that's something that we need to pay much more attention to that's not well thought about. Furthermore, I would also say for strategic leaders today, and this takes me a little bit outside of my own area, but I think it's very important for leaders to develop networks and to develop networks of trust. Because one of the problems once you get up to a certain level, once you get to the strategic level, right, you're going to have to interact with people who are not part of your chain of command, that are not part of your own unit and not part of your own organization. So you have to reach out and be able to work with sister services, with the civilian government, with the private sector, with nonprofits, that kind of stuff. And I think it's very important for strategic leaders to develop those networks. And once you have networks like that, you can ideally move at the speed of trust rather than the speed of command, right? So a good example of this, I would think, is some of the coordination that happened after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, where we had several military leaders in different countries throughout the Indian Ocean region who all personally knew each other from their experience in professional military education, which facilitated cooperation, right? So again, the more networks, cooperation, and trust you have, I think is quite important. So I'm going to just, again, very short remarks. I'll draw these to a close. But I think you have to think about developing future strategic leaders who have to look forward to the future and upcoming changes, with the caveat that the really big, large changes are actually difficult to discern at the time, right? To actually see the deep muscle movements of what's happening is actually quite difficult at the time. I think it's also important that we develop sort of critical, realistic history of our own military operations so we can study for lessons learned, help people make better crisis simulations and case studies that we can use, and then look into the future for developing networks and trust with our partners. So again, I think it's just my key takeaway is Chanakya sort of advised us that we need to build up lifelong learning, and I think it's really important for strategic leaders, and Jai Hind.
Thank you. Before I think follow up with what Dr. Amit Gupta said and try and take this forward, we've seen the weaponization of the pagers, the walkie-talkies, the pens, and of course that points to a very resilient requirement of a resilient supply chain. But we've also seen for the requirement of surge that all the ammunition in the world available anywhere was bought off the shelf. In our effort to go Atmanirbhar, we are going to import a lot of equipment, we are going to import a lot of technology. Most of this comes with embedded technologies and systems. So, my question to the panel especially is that, on one side we are talking of resilient supply chains, trusted supply chains. The other side we are talking of opportunistic supply chains. How does India dwell into this story with the concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat, and how do we take it forward? Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, this is a very big problem because you have a lot of do-it-yourself and commercial off-the-shelf solutions for armed forces now today. And to be very brief, I would say that possible solution would be something like to localize a lot in production of very simple things that you can produce ever. Because if you want to securitize everything, you cannot buy anything from abroad. That's the problem with microelectronics components, for example. But I think the commercial market is big enough to find the solutions, find components, find some sub-products or materials which you could use in large scales, and which you might use to produce a lot of weapons, a lot of not very sophisticated weapons, for example. If you don't need a lot of advanced capabilities, but you need a lot of capabilities. As early Burke once said to Elmo Zumwalt, you need numbers. If you need numbers, you will have to produce something on the foreign market.
Patrick, can you just, I just want to ask this question to you. Both the Ukrainian forces and the Houthis have received a lot of equipment from the West as well as for the Iranians. And they've used this equipment with high level of proficiency, if I were to say, for over 1 year, 2 years, without having any formal training, both in maintenance as well as in operations. Is there a lesson for us in the army to look at tweaking our model, or how do you think they have achieved this?
Go back to the Afghan war, where the US gave Stinger missiles to the Mujahideen, or whatever they were calling themselves then. And these were people who live in caves and have 18 children, and if they were lucky, passed the second grade, because Afghanistan never had an educational system. But they were able to fire Stinger missiles. This is always, if you look at industrialization in Europe, they brought in people from Africa, Morocco, the West Indies, who are uneducated, put them into technologically complex environments, or at least advanced environments, and they could turn the levers in a factory. They can fire Stinger missiles. They can launch drones. I mean, this stuff is not difficult. And yes, the Indian Army doesn't have to upgrade to every Jawan is a computer IT specialist to do this. I'll just give you a story to give you an idea how incredibly inventive Indians are. My cousin was taking me for a drive through rural Maharashtra, and we saw a drone flying over somebody's field. So we stopped, and there's these two kids who still haven't graduated high school. And we said, "What are you doing?" They said, "Oh, our uncle hired us to make sure that the fields get irrigated." So we sent the drone over, and if it looks like the field is dry, we hit our cell phone, and the irrigation system starts off. So I asked them, "Where did you get the drone?" They said, "Amazon." Then I said, "How many years of education do you have?" "I'm in 8th class, I'm in 9th class. This is not a problem. This stuff is meant for idiots. And that is why I think it's so dangerous.
My question is not so much from the utility perspective. My question was from maintenance, because flying a drone is a different ball game, and flying a ballistic missile is a different ball game altogether. So therefore, we need to look at these issues. Now, the last question that I want to ask before I open this to the audience. Communications has played a huge role in this shortening of the OODA loop, and invariably in the past, communications and intelligence was a state-controlled subject. In the war in Ukraine, with the Starlink coming in, really speaking, the state control has gone out of their hands, and future wars is going to see more of the satellite-based communications, which may be privately provisioned, as well as the OSINT, open source intelligence, which will be available on the net, on demand, on a price. This is going to change the warfare in the future. And therefore, is there a need for the Indian Army? Patrick, would you like to take this on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think this is one of the more difficult subjects, I think, for militaries or governments to do, particularly in liberal democracies where you don't have, like, say, state-controlled media, right? And this is how are you going to control narratives, and how do you develop different narratives out there, particularly given that a lot of this is going to be done in the private sector and be done by other actors. I think that most militaries and governments could get better at this, but I think there's at some level it's not going to be something you're going to be able to control. And I would also say that in the past, right, this has also been more difficult than I think we often have these sort of nostalgic memories of being able to control narratives in the past, but in the Cold War, pre-Cold War period, right, that was also a battle of narratives, and I think it's never been really easy. So I think we have a tendency to think that we were better at this than we were. But again, it's a very real problem, and I think it's a struggle that will have to be addressed, but will not be 100% successful. Sorry, that's kind of a non-answer, but...
Okay. Can we have some questions from the audience? I think that will be the best. Yeah, you had a chance. I think let's ask somebody else. Is there anybody else? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Sir, my question to Professor Amit Gupta. Sir, as you mentioned that India has no strategic alliance, don't you think that...
Hold the mic a little bit below because it muffles your voice.
Oh, okay, sir. Sir, as you mentioned that India has no strategic alliance, so don't you think that it is helping India in maintaining the regional power and helping the world to save from the energy crisis?
Next question.
No, next question. Just a thought, if the chair allows. This Chanakya Dialogue 2 is taking in the backdrop of so many conflicts in the world. I think we should be mindful of that. And while the land warfare parameters have been adequately highlighted, I wish to make a couple of points, very quick points. First and foremost thing which has stood out is that while the conflict initiation was clear to the attacker, perhaps the conflict termination was not perceived correctly. A case in point is Russia. Hence, the conflict is actually got extended. It was initially thought to be very short-lived, and my friend from Premakov, whom I met in the recent past, will be able to throw some light. Second point I wish to highlight is that perhaps the attacker had underestimated the enemy. The will of the people of Ukraine was not correctly understood. Third and most important point that comes to my mind at the strategic level is that the nuclear deterrence has actually been called a bluff at the global level. Case in point is again Russia. We have numerous examples. In case of India, I think Balakot is more than a live example wherein the nuclear deterrence or capability has been called a bluff. Last but not the least, well, the surge in operation is well taken care of. Everyone needs to have a lot of depth in the defense industry capability. But the fact of the matter is when you go down to the brass tacks of the chemicals and the ingredients, a case in point is nitrocellulose, which the primary supplier is China to Russia. It is a dual agent. It's a dual product chemical which is used for paint, also varnish, also used for gunpowder. The similar kind of mineral dominance in the world is restricted to only few countries. Perhaps India has to take a look at these critical minerals which will actually come very handy at the time of criticality. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. I am Sangeeta Saxena, Editor, Aviation and Defense Universe. I'm a journalist. And my question is to the point made by Dr. Gupta that embedded journalism is something which should not be happening. Derogatory statement at the beginning, absolutely. And at the end of the day, sir, I'm a journalist who's done 3 wars as an embedded journalist. And let me tell you, everybody wants to set a narrative.
Everybody wants to what?
Set a narrative. Every government wants to set a narrative. And when it wants to do that, media has always been a force multiplier. And you want the world to know. And the world also wants to know. Now, when there is a theory in media, give the people what they want and give the people what they must have. So what they want does not happen in the field of defense and aerospace. It is what they must have. Now, in that case, is there an alternative you have in mind for the media or for yourselves to have a narrative set by somebody else which would be accepted by the public? Anybody can answer.
I'll give you my take, but,
Mike. Take a mic.
Look, It's two things. What happened in the Russia-Ukraine case? In the Russia-Ukraine case, the West essentially wrote the narrative, and anybody who wanted to give an alternative voice was shut down. On YouTube, if you were saying anything which was pro-Russian, it disappeared. So much for democracy, free press, First Amendment, and all those other things. They only work when they work to your advantage. That was there. What happened by 2023 is a whole lot of people around the world started talking about this and providing alternative voices. And if you look now, most serious people who want to learn about Russia, Ukraine, don't read the New York Times and the Washington Post, which are basically the shills of the American establishment. I mean, these are the people who apologize for their coverage of the Iraq war because it was so biased and one-sided, even though they claim that the papers are record. What was more interesting is they are now going to Military Summary Channel, Asia Defense Politics. I can go down the list of even people like, controversial people like Scott Ritter. Don't laugh. You see, the danger for the print media is because you kowtow to a government or you're not willing to go too far from what the government says, you start becoming irrelevant. And that is why TikTok is more important in America to the younger generation than the New York Times, because A, the younger generation doesn't read, so the New York Times is a waste of paper for them. But B, these people haven't learned to reach out to. And young people are not stupid. They can see what is canned. So my argument, because the first panel which talked about social media said we have to control social media. Wrong answer. What you have to say is we are a democracy and we welcome 127 opinions because we are strong enough. And I'll end by saying one thing, why democracies are strong. The Scottish asked for independence. Okay? If this happened in the Middle East, there would have been an invasion, people would have been killed. What happened? David Cameron told the Scots, we'll give you a referendum. Please do not go, but understand one thing, this is not a public toilet. You don't go out and then to come back in 10 minutes later. Once you're gone, you're gone. British democracy survived and worked because they worked on the democratic principle that we will allow you to exercise your will. And I would say this, in a war, admit when you're wrong. Say, yeah, we made mistakes. People can be remarkably forgiving, both domestically and internationally. Problem is governments don't think that way. Governments think they have to have a monopoly of information. And again, this goes back to the first Iraq war. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In conclusion, let me kind of wind up this entire session. Which question was that?
Yeah. Me again. Look, I am a firm believer that India should not have a strategic partner. Firstly, because it puts you into a series of entanglements that you will not like. Two, look at strategic partners. When the US tells Australia to jump, it says how high. If the US tells India to jump, the answer is going to be, before I jump, you jump, and then I'll make up my mind whether I feel like it. India is described as the cat that walks alone. It's very difficult to corral and take a particular position in the way allies do. You saw all those allies which I put up on from NATO. They all went with the position on Brussels and Washington's position on Ukraine. I mean, the only person who isn't is Viktor Orban, for whom he's despised in the West. My take on India is this. I don't want India to be a regional power. I want India, I'll give you my vision for India, guys. Let it become a developed country. Let it become a first-rate academic power, educational power. Your educational system is spiraling downwards. Okay? And if you ever want me to come and give a talk on that, I'll come. But it has to be in the morning before everybody runs away after eating their lunch. I don't like that. Now, that is your number one problem. And the reason you lose in AI and computer technology and everything else is you do not have the educational institutions which provide the people to do this. And don't tell me the IITs. An IIT has 8,000 people in it. So what, you have 100,000 people who are IIT graduates in a country of 140 crores? What about the University of Darbhanga? What about the University of Ahmednagar? That is, I think, to answer your question, I think healthcare matters in India. I think the environment matters in India. Do you all like living in the most polluted city in the world? Though I gather Lahore finally beat New Delhi, so congratulations. You're now number 2. These are the things that in the long run matter. And Ashok Modi at Princeton, who wrote the book on the Indian economy, said this. He says India's problems are it doesn't invest in human capital, it doesn't create jobs. Half my Uber drivers have BA degrees. When I used to take black and yellow taxis 20 years ago in Delhi, you were lucky if you could find a guy who could read in any language. So my answer to you is don't think in terms of power politics. Think of this country as a young country with incredible potential, which doesn't have to toe the line of anybody. And I'll end by saying this. Militarily, work with the people who are willing to offer you the best deals. With the United States, stop doing these stupid things, F-16, F-414. America is an educational powerhouse. Now, the people in the US Embassy won't like that, because if you say educational powerhouse, it says, oh my God, we're a country of liberals. You know, that is their problem. But the US can help you escalate the education ladder in this country. 2, healthcare. The US is a healthcare powerhouse. Same trajectory. And the third one I would add is tourism wellness. America is the only country which can take a mouse and make him into an international cult figure where people pay thousands of dollars to go for 2 days in Florida or California to sit and watch this travesty of human existence. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me make some concluding remarks before I wind up. You know, the scope is very vast, and there's a huge spectrum out there which we could have talked about, whether it's cyber threats, ransomware attacks, proliferation of the dark web or the net, and the funding of terrorism through that. Many militaries are getting on board those nets through their cyber cells, and I think that's one area where we need to clearly define ourselves, how we're going to go forward, because much of the intelligence that would come off for the future operations in terms of terrorism, in terms of Naxalism, would come from those, because fundings would come from those. Second, I want to echo some comments which Dr. Gupta said, you know, about the attack on 13th of April when the Iranians attacked the Israelis. They threw at them 120 ballistic missiles, 30 cruise missiles, 150 drones. They spent close to about $800 million in that effort. The Israelis spent about $1 billion, and the Americans and the Brits together, I think, spent about $3.5 billion. That's about 35,000 crores in one day on air defense. That's the kind of money being spent. So war will always remain a very expensive game. You know, if you're in the camp that decides between butter and guns, then I think you are in the wrong country and wrong arena, I would say, that you're trying to play in. And last but not the least, you know, since we had a session on the environment as well, which was chaired over here, I want to leave you with this thought, because Diwali is coming near, and Dr. Gupta has talked about the pollution in this capital city. There is a huge environment impact of the war that is taking place in either in Ukraine or it is taking place in Israel or Gaza. And it will impact the future generations, the global warming and things to that effect. And some data was put to us yesterday by one of the panelists. We therefore need to think, and this is the thought I want to leave you with, that we need to think on the means and measures and the impacts and the responsibilities that countries would have to take post the victory in war as to how they're going to mitigate or do something for this environment as nation states who are, the victorious nations. So with those few thoughts, thank you so much for being a wonderful audience, and Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, and thank you to all of our panelists. I must admit, while this one turned out to be a very intense discussion, it did leave us with a lot to ponder about. On that note, can we firstly have a louder round of applause to thank our finale speakers for the final session? And with that, may I please invite on stage the Vice Chief of the Army Staff, Lieutenant General N.S. Raja Subramani, PVSM, AVSM, SM, VSM. Sir, I request you to please felicitate our speakers for the session. First up, sir, I request you to please felicitate Vice Admiral A.B. Singh. I now request you, sir, to please felicitate Dr. Konstantin Bogdanov. I further request you, sir, to please felicitate Professor Amit Gupta. And I now request you to please felicitate Dr. Patrick Bratton. With that, sir, I request you to please join our speakers. Sir, I'm going to request you to please join our speakers. Let's have you all come together for a group photograph. Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, as they say, it's not over until it's over. I'm going to request you all to please be seated while I thank our panelists and our speakers for joining us this evening. With that, as we managed to gather some very, very interesting and very pertinent thoughts from all our speakers across these 2 days of the Chanakya Defence Dialogue 2024, while we are coming closer towards the end of the program, to present the closing address, I'd like to please invite back on stage the Vice Chief of the Army Staff, Lieutenant General N.S. Raja Subramani. Sir, if I could please invite you back on stage to please present your closing address for the Chanakya Defence Dialogue 2024.
Thank you. Jal Dushyant, DG Klaus, esteemed panelists and participants from India and friendly foreign countries, distinguished scholars, ladies and gentlemen, and friends from the media. When I was listening to Dr. Amit Gupta in the end, and before I came here, I was thinking of pontificating about geopolitics, geoeconomics, technology, and whatever we had discussed. But he poured cold water. He said we should first focus on education and healthcare. So that's a very important aspect that he has spoken about. Now I'll come on to some takeaways from what we have discussed in the last 2 days. The topic of the seminar was drivers for national growth, nation building, fueling growth through comprehensive security. In the last 2 days, we have spoken the entire gamut. We started off with geopolitics, spoke about economics, environment. Today morning, we spoke about, Professor Somnath, Dr. Somnath spoke about space situational awareness, and Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj spoke about multilateral issues. And then we had an aspects of social cohesion, technology, and finally ending up with the contours of land warfare, which was the last session. So if we want to be Viksit Bharat in 2047, during the session, or during the 2 days, we are very clear that economic growth and national security are inextricably interlinked. To be secure, you need a stable external environment and an internal environment where the nation is secure, socially cohesive, and not rocked by internal interest. For a stable external environment, you require a friendly neighborhood, and also you require a geopolitical environment to be reasonably stable and conducive to your efforts. So the relationship between security and economic growth is very clear, as has been brought out by the various participants yesterday. The Defense Minister also said that the role of defense in economic growth is not clearly understood. Normally, most of us think that money spent on defense is a waste. The butters and guns debate that was alluded to. But defense spending has a multiplier effect both in peace as also during war. The Chief also clearly enunciated the fact that we should not consider military in isolation as part of the dime matrix, but military has got a pivotal role to play in the entire whole of nation approach. And we have looked at the various facets of security. It's not only military, all other facets, whether it be economics, technology, environment, all of them play a role towards comprehensive security. In terms of external relationships, no country today, even of India's size, can afford to go it alone. And strategic partnerships are important if you have to deter stronger adversaries. Whether you bandwagon, whether you hedge, whether you partner with somebody, you require somebody to ensure that you have an adequate deterrent against your adversary. And the mix of hard and soft power was very clearly brought out. But no amount of soft power, whether it be culture or diplomacy, will alone succeed. At the end of the day, you require hard power in terms of that stick and that deterrence to deter your enemy from attacking you. When Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj spoke, she spoke about the reform of multilateral institutions, the need for reforms in global governance. All those issues, and India is playing a very important role in articulating the voice of the global south. As far as economy is concerned, it's very clear that economic prosperity provides the resources for national security. And in order to be economically prosperous, we need access to resources. Also, if possible, we should be self-sufficient. We cannot be self-sufficient in everything. But our supply chains have to be reasonably resilient. And supply chains have to be reliable. And as a nation, we have to concentrate on building up our infrastructure, as also technology. And Professor Sanyal alluded to the fact that we should be looking at shipbuilding, we should be looking at semiconductors. Also, I feel that we should also be looking at the various components. It's not necessary to make the entire systems, but simple components, as was alluded to by somebody, so that we build up a strong manufacturing base for our country. As far as environment is concerned, there is a need to balance growth and environment. India as a developing country needs to develop, needs to grow, but this will always be in conflict with ecological concerns. And we need to ensure that we develop in a sustainable manner. The aspect of border area development and the need to protect sensitive ecologies was clearly enunciated. And I feel that if we involve our local communities in border area development, that would help. Also, border area development is not only for the military, it enables development of local economies, enables development of local communities, and the development itself ensures the security of the borders, case in point being China's border settlements and our own vibrant villages program along our borders. The importance of social cohesion is a no-brainer. Any country to be strong has to be internally cohesive. And we discussed various aspects of internal cohesion, including the rule of law, accountability, transparency, synergy between the various institutions. And all those are important takeaways as far as we are concerned. The last two sessions on technology and the contours of land warfare clearly brought out that warfare has changed, technology is important, but the man behind the machine, the importance of training, understanding what technology can do for you is also equally important. And it is important for armies to understand the strategy, to understand where wars are leading and to prepare for them now. We can't be entirely self-reliant, but we need to pick the right technologies. We need to concentrate on training our people in those technologies. and understanding as to how we can harness AI for multiplier effects in terms of our weapons as also in terms of our tactics. Finally, I want to thank General Dushyant, Director General Claus, the Deputy Chief of Army Staff Strategy, the DG SP, and his entire team for having conceptualized this event, one, and for having put together a very wonderful program. And also I should not forget all the panelists and the speakers who have made this event memorable and given us number of insights which we will now take forward as we strive towards a more modern and a technologically adept Indian Army, which will provide the contours for a Sashakt Bharat, in turn providing the foundations of a Viksit Bharat in 2047. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your comprehensive thoughts and your valuable observations for all of us to reflect upon, as much as you accentuated on strategy and training. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to please invite on stage Additional Director General Claus, Major General RPS Bhadauria, VSM, to please propose the vote of thanks for the Chanakya Defence Dialogue 2024. Can we have a round of applause? Please help me welcome on stage Major General RPS Bhadauria.
Thank you very much. The Vice Chief of Army Staff, esteemed speakers, senior general officers, respected veterans, ladies and gentlemen. You will all agree with me that over the last 2 days, we have had extremely interesting, fruitful, and mentally stimulating sessions. The discussions over 6 sessions have alluded to the fact that we can realize the dreams of Viksit Bharat by 2047 only if we are mindful of geostrategic interplay, navigate the global challenges effectively, and remain focused towards self-reliance, capacity and capability building, development, and equitable and inclusive growth. Now, all that remains for me is to take this opportunity on behalf of the Chief of Army Staff and the Director General, Centre for Land Warfare Studies, to propose a vote of thanks for all those who have contributed to the grand success of Chanakya Defence Dialogue 2024. To begin with, we wish to extend our deepest gratitude and heartfelt thanks to the Honourable Raksha Mantri, Shri Rajnath Singh, for having graced with his presence. Although I am proposing the vote of thanks on behalf of the Chief of Army Staff, but I will fail in my duty if I do not mention the guidance and the motivation provided by him and the Vice Chief of Army Staff since the time we began conceptualizing the Chanakya Defence Dialogue 2024 sometime in May this year. Sir, your vision has truly elevated the profile and the significance of this event, and we are sure that you will remain a beacon of inspiration for Claus in our future endeavours as well. Our gratitude is due to Lieutenant General Tarun IH, the Deputy Chief of Army Staff, who was also instrumental in conceptualizing and conducting the inaugural session of Chanakya Defence Dialogue last year, and Lieutenant General Airy, the DG SP, for their support and mentorship. Despite the busy schedules, they ensured that we remain focused. The Deputy Chief, in fact, had eye for details, and he ensured that we remain focused and we conducted this event in a very flawless manner. I would like to extend our heartfelt appreciation and sincere gratitude to all the session chairs and esteemed panelists for having taken time out from their busy engagements and sharing with us their profound insights on contemporary issues. Without presence of each one of them, the event would have lacked its luster. Each one of them brought to the table some exceptional insights and perspectives. A special word of thanks and gratitude to our esteemed guests and subject matter experts from friendly foreign countries who have put forth their perspective so cogently and helped us understand the nuances of complex geostrategic issues. I would like to extend heartfelt thanks to our wonderful MC, Kavya, Your energy, professionalism, and seamless handling of the event is truly commendable. Our profound appreciation is also due to Air Marshal Rajiv Sachdev, who has been pivot of all the activities connected with the conduct of this particular dialogue. Thank you very much, Air Marshal Sachdev. Our very special thanks is due to the ADG, Briggs Strat, and all the officers of the SP Directorate who have been very supportive and helpful. I would like to place on record our gratitude to CO 17 Jack Riff, who sorted out many of the issues connected with the finances. Your cooperation was extremely pivotal in making this event a success. Finally, a special gratitude is due to the team clause, ably led by the Director General, who have put in sustained efforts in ensuring that the event goes glitch-free. I wish to place on record the huge contribution made by the serving officers pursuing their research fellowship with clause. They have worked tirelessly towards success of this event. Young and vibrant research assistants, interns were always on the ball and worked many long hours. I would fail in my duties if I do not recognize the commendable efforts put in by Colonel Rana and Colonel Dalal. We would also like to commend the hard work and professionalism displayed by Team Quebecs, who have been relentless in their efforts throughout the conduct and even during the planning stage. Clause thanks the management and staff of Manekshaw Centre, without whose support the event could not have been such a success. Lastly, our sincere thanks is due to all the esteemed attendees for making this event a grand success. Your active engagement and thought-provoking contributions have enriched our sessions over these 2 days. Thank you all once again. We eagerly await meeting you all in our next events and also in the Chanakya Defense Dialogue 2025. With this, I would like to wish you all a very happy Deepavali. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, sir, for those words of gratitude. And we take that gratitude forward as we also look forward to hosting you for the Chanakya Defense Dialogue 2025. But on that note, as we call it a wrap to this inspiring edition, I sign off quoting Robin Williams from the movie Dead Poets Society. No matter what anyone tells you, words and ideas can truly change the world. This is Kavya signing off as I invite you all for high tea. And with that, this is a wrap to the second edition of the Chanakya Defense Dialogue 2024. Dhanyavad. Jai Hind.